like to welcome you all to the Kessler Brothers room on in the Advanced Science and Technology Center on the Zane State campus. This building opened in 2014. We're delighted to have you take a walk around afterwards and look at some of the technology type things we do. Our engineering programs are located here, but we're delighted to welcome you all to our community to play this role by hosting this debate in this election, and just appreciate you all being here. So good luck to both of the candidates, and hope you have a wonderful day.
In Zanesville decided to major party nominees for Ohio State Auditor, Republican Keith Faber and Democrat Zack. Jeremy Pelzer, politics reporter for Cleveland.com. And before we get started, here's a quick summary. Candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement and a 2-minute closing statement. In between that, I'll ask questions of the candidate I have prepared that they have not seen in advance. After that, we will post questions submitted by the public that have been vetted by the campaigns, and if they directly mention their opponent, we'll allow a 30-second rebuttal. So for those of you who don't know, the state auditor serves essentially as the ethics watchdog, conducting audits of more than 6,000 state and local government agencies. The auditor, among other things, also serves on the state's new Redistricting Commission after the 2020 census will for Ohio legislative districts and potentially congressional districts as well. Silent during the debate so we can focus on what the candidates are saying, but applaud both Keith Faber and Zack. So we had a coin toss before the debate, and Mr. Space, you have you're first in the opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Keith, for agreeing to this discussion, and thank you to Zane State, Jeremy, of course, as well as all of you who are here today. It's good to see some friendly faces. So I'm Zack, and I'm running for state auditor, and I'm going to start by saying I think it's high time that we be honest about what's happening to our democracy. The people of Ohio, and certainly the people of this part of Ohio, Appalachian Ohio, where I also hail from, have rightfully lost faith in a process that caters more to money and political ambition than it does to the needs of everyday Ohioans. We've seen that loss of faith justified over and over again by things like the corruption of our public education through for-profit charter school companies. We have seen that loss of faith justified by the influence of campaign contributions on policies relating to payday lending, a group that exploited the interests of the poor for over a decade and didn't stop until light was shined on it by the media. We've seen it with local government funds cut back to finance income tax reductions that benefit primarily wealthy donors. And we've seen this justified through the process of gerrymandering, which disenfranchises us, it empowers extremism, renders government dysfunctional, feeds to the cynicism, and serves as a means to divide us. The auditor is in a position to make a difference. The auditor, as a watchdog of taxpayer money, has a constitutional responsibility to do something about legislation designed to placate the donor class, and as your auditor, I will sit on the Redistricting Commission and end gerrymandering in Ohio. My goal is to create a state where everyone matters and no one is left behind. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Keith Faber. I'm running to be your auditor of state. And I just want to start out by telling you a little bit about my background. I am the youngest of 4 kids. We were raised by a single mother. I learned the value of hard work early on. My very first job was when I was 12 years old as a janitor at a local business, where I learned how to sweep floors and clean toilets, and learned that if you needed something extra, you had to work harder for it. I'm proud of that record. I'm proud of the fact that I'm the first one in my family to go to college. with the help of some scholarships and the ability to work my way through school, I was able to get a good undergraduate education. That led me an opportunity to go to Ohio State. Again, with scholarships and the ability to work my way through college and law school and some grad school, I was able to meet meet my God-given potential and live the Ohio dream. I started working in a small town where I met my wife working for the same company. Andrea is here. Thank you, dear, for coming. We've been married for 23 years. We have 2 wonderful kids, an 11-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son, and while we're not perfect parents, we always try to be parents first. Also, my father-in-law is here, somebody else who's emphasized to me how important education is. I believe in making education more accessible and available to all Ohioans. I'm proud of our record in the state legislature. I'm proud of the fact that the last time Democrats were in power, they left the state with an unbalanced budget and 89 cents in the state's rainy day fund, but we fixed that. We balanced the budget, we've cut taxes by nearly $5 billion, and we've done regulatory reform. It's showing up. Today in Ohio, we have nearly 550,000 new jobs as compared to the 400,000 jobs the last time Democrats that were lost, the last time Democrats were in control. You see, to me, this election's about the future of Ohio. It's about jobs and the economy. It's about making sure everyone, our kids and our grandkids, can meet their God-given potential. That's why I'm running to be your state auditor. I'm Keith Faber, and at the end of this debate, I'm going to ask for your vote.
Thank you very much, both of you. So we're going to start with some moderator questions. Most of these questions are going to be for the both of you. You'll each have 90 seconds. So first off, I've heard both of you talk in the past about the need for the state auditor to serve in a nonpartisan manner, to be able to not be afraid to scrutinize members of both parties. Of course, both of you have served, or in Representative Faber's case, are serving in partisan office. Given that, why should the public trust either of you to serve in a nonpartisan way, and what would you do to ensure that the auditor's office remains above party politics? We'll actually start with former Congressman Space.
Jeremy. So I have a record that I'm proud of that's based in bipartisanship. My service in Congress, representing this part of Ohio, I was not wedded to ideology. I know that there are some of my good friends in this room who may not have been happy about my vote on certain occasions. I've been willing to buck my party. I've bucked Nancy Pelosi on trade. I've bucked her on other issues as well when I was in Congress. I have worked very hard, not only in Congress, but before I got there as well as after I left, to promote civility, active in measures designed to promote civility, and have been categorized as someone who rises above partisanship on a number of occasions by some of Ohio's largest newspapers, including the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Columbus Dispatch, the Akron Beacon Journal, and the Elyria Chronicle, among others. This is a job that requires the auditor to be as nonpartisan as possible. Here's the problem. Our government has been gripped by extremism, and that extremism has promoted this partisanship to the point that parties can't even get together anymore. As a member of the Redistricting Commission, I'm going to help end gerrymandering, which will help rid this state of the extremism that has created this hyper-partisanized environment. That's a commitment I've made and one that I will stick to.
Right, thank you. Representative Faber.
The state auditor's office, while it's a partisan election, is not a partisan office. It is your job to call balls and strikes as the umpire. If you've got a Democrat who does something good, you commend her for it. If you've got a Republican who does something bad, you condemn them on it. It really doesn't matter their party. It matters that you're the fiscal watchdog for the state of Ohio. It's your job to represent Bob and Betty Buckeye in the transactions that involved Ohio. Now, we can talk about extremism, and I think that that's a good place to start. Congress is not the same thing as state government. The extremism that we see in D.C. is not reflected by and large in state government. In fact, when I was president of the state Senate, over 90% of the bills we passed were bipartisan. I think that's a good track record. We had a very strong working relationship with people on both sides of the aisle. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some issues where the parties are going to go to their respective corners, whether it's abortion or gun rights, or whether it's issues involving some funding and financial issues, whether it's issues involving taxes. I'm for tax cuts. I think we've proved that you can invigorate Ohio's economy by making sure that state government works better. See, to me, this election and this office is all about making sure state government is efficient, effective, and transparent. And the way you do that is by going and getting the bureaucrats to work better. And bureaucrats, I know this shocks people, are not Republicans or Democrats per se, they're status quo. And it's our job as the auditor's office, particularly with using performance audits, to find ways for them to do their jobs better.
Next question, again for the both of you, is while each of you has experience in government, the only candidate for state auditor with experience working as a professional auditor or an accountant is the libertarian, Robert Coogan, who isn't here today. Given this, how much of a learning curve would you each face if elected? We'll start with Representative Faber.
Background in state government, my experience in handling budgets and working on the state agencies, which make up most of the state spending, gives me the ability to hit the ground running. But don't take my word for it. It's the comments that the last 4 state auditors have said when they endorsed my candidacy. It's the comments that the Ohio Association of CPAs said when they endorsed my candidacy for this race. The ability to know how to do that work. My private sector experience is also important here. For the last 23 years, I've been a mediator, helping people sit down and find solutions to problems in a most efficient way possible. That, in addition to handling complex financial litigation, has given me the ability to look at the roles of the office and the ability to manage the office in a very effective way. I have managed a very large staff. I've managed a budget that's nearly $140 billion. All of those things are important in learning how state government works, and that gives me the ability to hit the ground running on day one. In fact, if you look at Ohio's history, we've only had one accountant be state auditor. That's Mary Taylor. She's endorsed me in this race.
Actually, Keith and I have somewhat of a similar background in terms of our experience and professionalism. I do have some federal experience. I've got local government experience. I think all these things experience in the private sector translate well. But what matters most is the vision that we bring to this office. The traditional role of auditor is to serve as a watchdog of taxpayer money, of course. That means doing everything you can to provide resources to local government to make sure that they can run and operate efficiently, that taxpayer monies are not being stolen, are subject to misappropriation. I get all that. That's important. But there's something else larger about my vision for this office that my opponent cannot claim. I understand the insidious impact of money on policy. I think Keith understands it too, but he's not willing to confront it. I am. We need to fix this broken democracy. We need to give everybody a say, not just people who give big money. For this race, for this position, the most important thing is, what is the candidate's vision for this office? I'm being honest about what's happening to our government today. I think we need to be fair in how our government operates and rational. This provides me with, I think, a clear edge over my opponent. Look to see who's being honest about the way this government's really working and who's committing to giving everybody a voice, not just big donors.
Representative Faber, you were mentioned, so you have a 30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. I find this interesting because this has been Zack's retort during this campaign. He talks about the insidious nature of money in politics. Well, let's look at where the money is in this race. The fact of the matter is over 60% of Zack's donors have come from out of state or from large special interest. That's over $1 million. The fact of the matter is almost all the money we've gotten in this race, this campaign, has come from individuals from across Ohio. That's a difference in perspective. Zack has a habit of saying one thing and doing something else, but
right.
We'll talk about that more in this race.
Great. So following up, Mr. Space, on what you're talking about with vision, it seems that you and your opponent have rather different ideas about how to approach the job of auditor. You've indicated, for example, that you would use your audit powers, if elected, in ways beyond what the auditor's office has traditionally done. Like to say, you proposed doing audits on how NAFTA and other trade agreements would affect local governments. You would look more into the now shuttered electronic classroom of tomorrow. So Representative Faber says this shows you don't have a grasp of the powers and the duties of the office. Could you explain more about why the auditor's office should be focused on things that, even if the audits aren't themselves political, could be used and clearly be exploited in a political way?
You mentioned the trade issue. I'll mention that, and we've briefly touched on ECOT. 2 great examples. Chapter 117 of the High Revised Code, Section 117.11, provides the auditor with broad special audit powers when the auditor determines in his or her discretion that there's reasonable cause to believe that a special audit is necessary for public good or public benefit. In the case of trade, we have allowed budget cycle after budget cycle after budget cycle, local government funds have been cut with total disregard for what this does to our communities. These monies are being used to provide Ohio's wealthiest people with tax cuts, and it's forcing local governments into a situation where they can't fill potholes, they can't staff jails, they can't staff fire and police departments, they can't fund education, they can't deal with the opioid epidemic. All these things are a result of these budgets that seem to have drawn a total deaf ear from the legislature when it comes to what these trade policies have done to us, the impact of these trade deals on our communities. Keith says that, oh, I'm gonna audit trade deals. I'm not going to do that. I'm auditing the impact that they've had on our communities, which has been significant. Ohio taxpayers have a right to know. The General Assembly apparently doesn't understand it, and the special audit power is a way to inform policy. The same thing with ECOT. The auditor could have stopped ECOT years ago by either doing a special audit or declaring the books unauditable. The auditor chose to look the other way.
All right. Thank you very much. Representative Faber, as you were mentioned, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I think I actually get a minute and a half because the question started here, didn't it?
Clear. That question was specifically for Mr. Space, but as you mentioned, you get a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, the short answer is when we talk about what the role of the auditor's office is, as the manager, you don't get to manage. You don't get to set public policy of the auditor's office. That's the entity that are elected to do that. The local elected office holders who do the public policy for local governments, or the legislature. If you want to run for Congress or the legislature because you don't like foreign trade agreements, do that. The auditor's office is to track the money and to make sure government money is spent accordingly. If you want to be a think tank person, go work for your friends at Innovation Ohio or Progress Ohio. The fact of the matter is the auditor's office isn't a think tank.
Senator Faber, this question then is for you. When you were Senate President, the Dayton Daily News found that your office and the Senate had no way of keeping track of its employees, like no key cards, no time cards. The Chief of Staff and Communications Director were allowed to keep their state jobs while at the same time being paid money to do political work. Do you feel this is a problem, and would you run things differently if elected state auditor?
Short answer is before that story came out, we had to start to put in a new timekeeping. That's pretty clear. A new time punch system in the Senate. After that investigation, which I called for, actually, I called for the Legislative Inspector General to do that investigation. They were cleared, and it is not uncommon in state government for people to work in other capacities on their own time, and that's what had happened there. The fact of the matter is that I have shown that I will call for an investigation on my own people when there's something that's questionable. And in that case, they were cleared, they were vindicated. It showed that actually they had worked a lot more hours in state government work than frankly was otherwise allotted. And so in that situation, look, I'm proud of our record, I'm proud of what we did, and frankly, I'm proud of our staff. Those were very hardworking, smart people who dedicated thousands of hours to the people of Ohio, which they never got compensated for.
This question is for the both of you. We'll start with Representative Faber. The job of state auditor is often seen as a springboard to higher office. To each of you, do you consider this job as a stepping stone, or is being state auditor your dream job?
Oh, okay. The short answer is I'm running to do the job. If you look at my record and what I've done as a state legislator, it has focused almost entirely in my time in the legislature trying to make state government work better, faster, cheaper. Whether it's going around the state to identify the need and then passing regulatory reform. Whether it's identifying opportunities for agencies to do things better with regard to customer service and trying to provide some standards. All of that ties into what the state auditor's office does. I'm proud of that record. That's why I'm running to be state auditor. The fact of the matter is that other jobs may come and go. For me, the ability to make state government work better is the real thing that I think we can do to leave our mark on Ohio for our kids and grandkids. That's why I'm running to be state auditor. Look, I look at other things like the ability now to do higher education performance audits, a piece of legislation that I pushed through when I was president of the Senate. Higher education is the only thing in our community, only thing in Ohio that's actually gone up faster than healthcare. As the first person in my family to go to college, I know how important it is to have affordable higher education. And that's why when I was president of the Senate, we issued the Ohio Senate Challenge. We asked Ohio colleges and universities to be more efficient and to reduce the cost of Ohio degrees. We succeeded. the cost reduction across Ohio wasn't 5% that we asked for. It was a statewide savings on average of 11.7%. We proved that making government work better shows results for real Ohioans. Now, a whole generation of Ohio students, they're saving money on their colleges and universities. That's the kind of thing I want to do with performance audits of state agencies.
Thank you. Mr. Space.
Jeremy, look, I am not a career politician. I've spent 4 years of my life, I'm 57 now, in an intense political environment. This would be an intense political environment, necessarily. It's a statewide race. I'm not running to advance a career. I'm not running to politicize or use this race as a political weapon, as I've been accused of. I'm running because I can see clearly that we have a serious crisis in confidence in this state. The fact that people are not voting, in fact, we're lucky to get half the people in the state registered and half of them to even turn out to vote, tells me that we have a serious crisis in confidence. People aren't voting because they don't believe in this democracy anymore. This race is one, this position is one where we can make a difference. We can start to shine a light on the corruptive influence of money on policy. Look, Trump was right. The system is rigged. Everybody knows it. Let's do something about it. It's time to do something about it. That's why I'm running, Jeremy, not to advance a career, because I'm doing what everybody should be doing what they can right now.
All right, this next question, we'll actually start with Mr. Space, but it's for the both of you. As mentioned earlier, the state auditor plays a role in stopping gerrymandering in Ohio, or at least helping to draw the legislative and potentially congressional districts as a member of the state's new Redistricting Commission, which of course Representative Faber helped pass as Senate President. So my question is, what would you like redistricting in Ohio to look like? I mean, should the goal be to create as many competitive districts as possible, or should the goal be for each district's lawmakers to reflect their area? Like, so Democrats should be elected in Democratic areas and Republicans in Republican areas. So we'll start with Mr. Space.
The goal should be to pursue representational fairness, as many competitive districts as we can, in a respect for the jurisdictional integrity of cities and counties and townships. Those factors have not been included at all when they've done this now for a generation. Don't get me wrong, even though the Republicans did it last time, Democrats have done it before. Gerrymandering is bad when Democrats do it or Republicans do it. It's bad because it disenfranchises millions of Ohioans on its face. Beyond that, it empowers extremism by creating these hyper-partisanized districts. That extremism renders government dysfunctional. That feeds the cynicism. And now, government and politics itself are being used as a platform to exacerbate the many divisions we have. Government should be bringing us together, not driving us farther apart. Keith Faber was integrally involved in this gerrymandering process. He's hiding behind the Constitution now, saying, oh, I'm going to follow the Constitution, and refusing to departisanize this process. Keith Faber tried to gerrymander his own home into the district of his choice. He'll say he did it to maintain the integrity of Mercer County. That's not true. Why is the line drawn essentially in his backyard? There is proof that Keith Faber has been involved in this process intimately, and he's done nothing to suggest that he's going to change that. Look, I understand that you were operating the climate you were operating in 10 years ago, but commit to departisanizing this process, Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Why don't we just tack on the 30-second rebuttal and give you a full 2 minutes?
I've heard this over and over from Zack. I find it really interesting that he is so strongly against gerrymandering that I think tonight he's got a Maryland governor coming in to do a fundraiser for him in Columbus that bragged about using the gerrymandering process to put his political rivals out of business. I find this attack and this interesting discussion from Zack and his Democrat allies very interesting, that they want to talk about gerrymandering here in Ohio, but they're not talking about it in New York or California or Illinois. And the fact of the matter is, in 2008, we offered the Democrats and Zack and his buddies the opportunity to do the constitutional amendment that I helped draft and that we passed in 2012, 2013, 2014, that basically ended gerrymandering in Ohio. We offered them to do it in 2008 before we got into the current system. You know what? They turned us down because they thought they were going to control all the statewide offices. So it's a little rich now for Zack and his party to be out there talking about gerrymandering. But let's talk about the facts. The Constitution that I helped draft, that provision that we passed at 4:30 in the morning, that I stayed up fighting to get on the ballot, passed by 70% of the vote in Ohio. It lays out a very clear process as to what you do when you draw districts. I do agree with Zack. Gerrymandering's bad. The fact of the matter is it created a bipartisan process that now will go through a series of tests. And the most important of those, in my opinion, are keeping local governments together and keeping districts compact. You know why that's important? You don't need to look any farther than counties like Summit County or Mercer County to see the distinction. Because the fact of the matter is when you keep communities together, you end up having people represented by people that share their values. That's how you come down to better government. That's how you build extra confidence in government. And in the end, this process will produce better results when we all take it seriously and follow the Constitution. We put very clear rules in the Constitution. I've committed to following the Constitution without regard to partisanship and how the lines end up, Republican or Democrat.
Because we rolled that into the 2 minutes, I'll give you a 30-second rebuttal.
First of all, you didn't offer me anything in 2008. I was in Congress at the time, had nothing to do with the process. The very lines you are complaining about right now, Summit County, for example, you were the one responsible for drawing them. You've done nothing. You've done nothing to provide assurances to the people of the state of Ohio that you will departisanize this process. This process shouldn't be designed to simply benefit the careers of politicians or provide one party with a partisan advantage over the other. That's what you've done.
All right.
The current Constitution prohibits that, Zack. You know it.
So we're going to move on. We're going to move on now to the public questions. These were all submitted by members of the public, and the first question is for Mr. Space. This one is from Brent and Henry from Gahanna. And Mr. Henry asks, Ohioans will vote on Issue 1, an amendment to the Constitution regarding drug penalties for drug crimes. Both Republican and Democratic candidates for public office have made their position on Issue 1 a campaign issue. Are you for or against Issue 1, and why?
So I oppose Issue 1 primarily because, and there are intricacies that I'm concerned about, primarily because it doesn't belong in the Constitution. Here's where it belongs. It belongs in statute. A General Assembly that was doing its job would have already undertaken the task of comprehensive criminal justice reform. The reason this General Assembly has done nothing, and Keith will say he's done wonders, but the truth is we're still seeing thousands and thousands of people dying from opioid addiction. We're still seeing mass incarceration that is disproportionately affecting people of color and poor people. The reason this General Assembly hasn't done anything is because of the extremism. They're afraid of alienating their base. They don't want to appear soft on crime. That's a direct result of the kind of lines that my opponent drew up after the 2010 census. That's a perfect example of why government is dysfunctional in Ohio. The extremism prevents anything from getting done, and we've seen it before with medical marijuana. We've seen it with the casino industry. Our Constitution is being riddled with all these amendments on things that our General Assembly should be doing but can't do because of its utter dysfunctionality that is a product of the extremism occasioned by gerrymandering.
Representative Faber's remarks, and of course, as he mentioned you'll get 2 minutes.
Thank you. The short answer is I agree with Zack that our Constitution is being riddled with stuff that really doesn't have to go with the framework of government, which is what constitutions are for. I was opposed to Issue 1 a long time ago. In fact, as a former probation officer, I know firsthand how bad Issue 1 is going to hurt the ability to get people to do better things when they're on probation and to make the drug courts work better. I'm just a little shocked that Mr. Space has really delayed taking a position on this until this week. I get it that he doesn't want to come out and say that Rich Cordray is wrong, Keith Faber's right, but I'm happy he's finally done that. Now, let's talk about all of these other things that are brought up in this issue with Issue 1 and drugs. The fact of the matter is when I was Senate President, early on in my Senate presidency, I identified the need to do criminal justice reform. In fact, I put together, along with the ACLU and a taxpayer organization, a group to look at the Ohio entire criminal code. We had 24 Ohioans from all over the state, including a justice of the Supreme Court. The task force was chaired by a judge and co-chaired by the Ohio Public Defender, bipartisan. We had people from all over the state, all walks of life, all views on criminal justice, spent 18 months going through the entire criminal code. They issued a report about a year ago. The legislature has started to implement some of those findings and recommendations, but frankly, they probably should have done more. But we started that process. In fact, I was recognized nationally for starting the process and the discussion on criminal justice reform in this state. I think it is so important that we continue to have this conversation about smart on crime. It's not about hard on crime. It's not about soft on crime. It's about smart on crime. And to do that, we need to look at this problem holistically. Putting things in the Constitution that are drafted by out-of-state Californians is not the solution for Ohio.
Mr. Space, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
So I appear to be the subject of criticism for having actually reflected on the issue and given it serious consideration as opposed to reflexively backing whatever my party does. That's a pattern that has emerged over the years. Look, again, criminal justice reform is something we desperately need in Ohio. It's clear. The legislature has failed to do something about it because of its extremism. That should send everybody a big red flag.
The Faber, it's from Rebecca Reagan of Union County, and it's Representative Faber. So the ECOT scandal has cost Ohio taxpayers a lot of money. As auditors, how will you help avoid such expensive waste in the future?
The short answer is, a state auditor, I'm going to audit every part of the education community. I'm going to audit traditional schools. I'm going to audit charter schools. I'm going to audit voucher money. We're going to go through that in a very thorough, detailed process. And the fact of the matter is, there are other things out there in the education environment that are beyond ECOT. For example, Dave Yost found that the Columbus Public Schools were doing a huge data scrubbing and manipulating numbers. There's a problem out there that Zack hasn't even begun to talk about, and it's the fact that in some of our larger public school systems, you've got almost 30% truancy. That's ECOT kind of level of kids not showing up and doing their work. All of these are things we need to start having a conversation on, because the state auditor's job is to make Ohio work better, faster, cheaper, and to find ways to be more efficient, more transparent. And frankly, that's why I'm really supportive of transparency. Transparency will identify and solve a lot of these problems. For example, I drafted the public records mediation program that specifically has produced a quicker, faster, better way to get public records from local governments. That program alone has been hailed as a national model to get your records that are yours better. As auditor, I'm also going to ask local governments to put things online, and we're going to audit, as part of the process, their compliance with existing public record law. The fact of the matter is, they're your records. That transparency is going to help make Ohio better.
I'll pose the same question about ECOT to Mr. Space.
I find it interesting that Keith would pivot to attacks on public education in response to a question about ECOT. Flags. Keith has been in the legislature for over 15 years now, and Auditor Petro, I think it was 2003, identified problems with ECOT. The Dispatch has written a very concise article about all the red flags that were issued. School administrators around the state have been raising red flags about ECOT. By the way, 30% truancy? ECOT's truancy was 70%. ECOT was not graduating kids. ECOT was depriving an entire generation of children of their full potential and promise. And if you pay real estate taxes in Ohio, you've been a victim of this, the largest scam, the largest political scandal in Ohio history. Keith Faber took over $36,000 from the founder of ECOT. And by the way, he took over $50,000 by the founder of White Hat, another unscrupulous for-profit charter school operator, and turned the other way. Instead of sending bills in his position as Senate President to the appropriate committee for resolution that would have solved this problem, he buried them. The record is clear. Don't believe me. Believe virtually every newspaper in Ohio that has opined on this issue. Keith Faber is a central figure in ECOT, and that alone should disqualify him for being state auditor.
Representative Faber, your 30-second rebuttal.
Once again, Zack has the facts just wrong. The fact of the matter is that we did pass charter school accountability in House Bill 2. In 2015, everybody's concern about ECOT was on quality. You know what happened? We passed the most comprehensive charter school accountability measure in state history. That bill, everybody anticipated, would either clean up ECOT or shut it down. In fact, Bill Lauger, who he claims gave me a lot of money, didn't like that bill. Bill Lauger hasn't supported this campaign, the campaign I had before that, and the fact of the matter is, after we talked about House Bill 2, Charter School Accountability, they stopped supporting our campaign because we talk about what matters, we talk about accountability, and that's what we passed.
Jeremy, and I think
I beg your pardon. Because that was in a 30-second rebuttal, according to the rules agreed by both campaigns, we're going to have to move on. Well, actually, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Space. So this question comes from Morgan Miller of Marietta, and she writes, Zack, you've made much of your campaign about the corrupting influence of money in politics, but you've repeatedly bragged about outraising your opponent this campaign. How do you reconcile this?
So I am proud of the fact that we have received money in this campaign from a lot of different people. If you look at the average size of my campaign contribution versus my opponent's, it's a mere fraction. He wants to, he's attempting to skew the facts to show that all of our money is coming from out of state. The truth is, our money is coming from essentially 3 different sources. People who believe in good government, and we're getting thousands of contributions from people who believe in the end how important it is to end gerrymandering, to shine a light on the corruptive influence of money on policy. We're getting money from Greek Americans. I'm a Greek American. The Greek American community around the country is proud of that. I can give them that. I'm a Greek, and I'm proud of it. And I'm getting money from men and women in labor unions. Keith has been on a crusade against labor unions for a long time, including teachers. The money that I've received from labor unions has been money contributed by their members, hard-working men and women all across Ohio. I'm proud of that. I'm not embarrassed of that. What Keith should be embarrassed of is the fact that he's taken over $1 million in corporate PACs since he's been in politics. Just in the last 5 years, he's taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporate PACs. I've taken less than 0.5% of my money from corporate PACs. We're standing up for what's right. People recognize that, and people are giving for good government. And by the way, I can't unilaterally disarm. We cannot. We've got to communicate our message. I wish I could. So someday I hope to be a part of a government that the campaigns are won and lost in the power of ideas, not money.
Representative Faber, 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, the facts are simple. In this campaign alone, not years of, I can talk about the millions of dollars more you've raised in your campaigns than I have over a longer career. The fact of the matter is, in this campaign alone, Zack, you've gotten over $1 million from people from outside the Ohio or special interests. You've also taken $300,000, besides talking about the corrupting influence of politics and money and saying you think it would be wrong to take money from people you're going to audit, you've gotten over $300,000 from people who are directly responsible to your office, including taking $5,000 from somebody whose office is currently being investigated by the state auditor's office.
I'm going to continue the questioning with Representative Faber. Actually, this question will be for the both of you, but I'll start with the representative. So this is from Robin Sweeney, who is a premium audit reviewer from New Philadelphia. Robin writes, last week the Associated Press reported on Keith Faber's pattern, quote, pattern of penalties for delinquent tax payments, end quote. We should also note that Mr. Space also has 2 tax penalties in his past as well. But Robin continues, to the candidates, what is your and what would you say to Ohioans who question your...
Thank you. Look, I'm not perfect. One of the businesses that I owned, I'm a quarter interest owner in the business. We've got the records. We believe all the tax payments were made on time. They didn't challenge some late notices. All of the records indicated that they showed up. They were mailed on time. They showed up within a day to 3 days after the date, and they were processed in that time period. That's the facts. We paid some $330 in penalties, over $50,000 to $60,000 in tax payments. I don't think that's a significant lapse. But what is a lapse is the fact that Zack also has 2 tax payments. His weren't a day to 3 days late. They were 43 and 3 days late. Let's just forget about those. The more troubling issue is how Zack has dealt with his other issues in his professional life. He had his law license suspended, not after he just forgot to make a payment. It's after he forgot to make a payment, then received a letter from the Supreme Court telling him to make a payment, received 2 more emails from the Supreme Court telling him to make a payment, still ignored it, and then got a certified letter from the Supreme Court suspending his law license. He also drove on an expired driver's license, saying, not a big deal, I'll take care of it next week. And then 2 of his businesses were suspended. Again, not just because he missed a payment, but because he failed to respond to a letter from the Secretary of State saying, you need to pay and bring these things current. That's a pattern of sloppiness. I get it. He wants to point to something one of our accountants did. I'll take the blame for that.
Mr. Space, I believe that qualifies for a 30-second rebuttal, so we'll give you a full 2 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, boy, where do I start? Let's start with the accusations about my taxes. In 2014, or 2004, 14 years ago, I pay my taxes, by the way, every month and always have. I pay it through an escrow company. When I pay my mortgage payment, it goes to the escrow company. The escrow company is the one that failed to pay the taxes, not me. I didn't find out about it until after the fact, and they paid the penalty. The other tax payment you're claiming I didn't make was a tenant that didn't make their utility payment. So I've paid my taxes. Keith, to suggest that the 35 times you've been late, it's been 35
it's false,
times.
Zack, and you know it. It's false, and you know it.
Hey, Keith,
it was 5 times over 11 years.
I've let you go on, all right, with your lies, and now it's my turn to tell people about the truth. The truth of the matter is 35 times you were late, 22 times you incurred penalties. You bring up my law license. I haven't practiced law in 12 years. 12 years. So I wasn't practicing without a license, and you know it. Look, chronic and habitual lateness. And by the way, this wouldn't even be an issue if you hadn't made it one. You attack me with an ad saying I don't pay my real estate taxes, and then we find out you haven't paid yours 35 times. You're projecting your own weaknesses onto me, which is a typical tactic that you do. You have misrepresented my position regarding my campaign. You have misrepresented my position regarding taxes. You have misrepresented my position on my record over and over and over and over. The only thing coming out of your campaign are lies and deceitful tactics, and it's been called out. The Columbus Dispatch did an editorial about your campaign tactics about 3 weeks ago. It's so bad. And this is in a world where we're all getting sick of these negative ads. We're all getting sick of these kinds of attacks. Let's talk about the merits. Let's talk about our vision for the office.
All right, under the rules, Representative Faber, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, Zack, your hypocrisy knows no bounds. The fact of the matter is, I love the fact you talk about the Photoshop photo that you went out and complained about me doing when your campaign had Photoshopped a picture of me and my kids weeks before that. I just love the fact that you're trying to dissuade what you're doing onto us. I mean, now you're saying we're doing that to you. I love that. The fact of the matter is, having your law license suspended is a big deal. If you haven't been practicing law, what have you been doing? Lobbying? Well, some people call that practicing law. So the reality of this is the record's clear. We had a few late tax payments. You've gone into the records. You tried to shop the story around to the media. You went into the records and tried to say that each one of those sub-payments on that record is somehow a late payment. It's one check, one payment.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to, so a lot of the questions that I got from the public got pretty wonky. There's a lot of people who take an interest in the auditor's office, whether professionally or just maybe because they have a hobby that involve detailing about the auditor's office. I'd like to get to one of them. This is from Tim Clymer, and he is the treasurer of the Village of Brooklyn Heights. And I'll ask this of Mr. Space. So there's something called the Hinkle system, and it's created to require local governments to submit their annual financial data electronically instead of through paper. So in the past, since this was created 4 years ago, the Auditor's Office has been getting a whole litany of data from local governments through this, and we've begun to see that data used in what's called a fiscal health indicator from the Auditor's Office. So I'll ask this of course, both of you, but I'll start with Mr. Space. So he has a two-part question, which is, do you intend to continue this fiscal health indicator program, and do you have any other additional initiatives that you intend to pursue with this wealth of data?
The data is important, and this is a process of essentially entering the digital age, and demonstrates some of the good things that can happen with data. I definitely think that it's important to rate these cities. I know that there's been some pushback from cities about having to list certain things on their financials that in the past they haven't had to list. For example, if the city has decaying infrastructure, representing that on the statements is important. But I also think it's important to work with local governments to make sure that this process is not one that unfairly scapegoats our leaders who have been put under enormous pressure by the economic realities of the present day, especially communities like this here in Zanesville. We have Zanesville Mayor Jeff Tilton here. We've got some members of council here. They understand the pressure that these budgetary policies that Keith Faber has been in large part responsible for have put on their local governments. We've got budget cycle after budget cycle after budget cycle rolling back local government funds in order to finance an income tax reduction that benefits primarily wealthy Ohioans. This has put enormous pressure on these districts or these communities. I think the auditor has an obligation to work with these communities to make sure that if they're showing some of these things in their financials that might outwardly appear to be somewhat distressful to their constituents, that there's communication and awareness about what they really represent, the long-term financial picture of these communities.
Representative Faber, we're going to tack on 30 seconds. You have 2 minutes.
The short answer is this is another method that the auditor's office is using to try and give Bob and Betty Buckeye more information and transparency about how local governments are working. I think generally we want to keep it. We probably want to improve it a little bit. As I've traveled the state talking to local governments, there are some concerns about how some of the data is being used and whether it means the implication that they're using it for. So we are concerned about that. We want to work with our local partners. We want to help improve customer service at the state auditor's office and make sure that that information comes to us in a readily usable way, and frankly also in a way that means what we think it means. And so that's one of the things we want to do to improve the system. You know, it's funny, Zack keeps mentioning the tax increase. I'm proud of the tax cuts, the tax cuts that we put in. I'm proud of those. I assume Zack is going to advocate for a tax increase because he thinks Ohioans pay too little in taxes. The fact of the matter is our economic policies have taken the economy in Zanesville from an area where you had double-digit unemployment now to a situation where you've got relatively low unemployment. Look, Ohio's doing better. Don't make a mistake. Better's still not good enough. We can keep doing better, but the way to keep doing better is not to go back to the tax more, spend more policies of Zack and his other colleagues the last time they ran state government. The way to make Ohio do better is to continue to talk about ways that allow job growth and the economy of this area to be stronger. That's the big distinction between our views of the way Ohio should be run.
Mr. Space, Representative Faber assumes you're going to raise taxes. You have to tell us if that's true or not.
Zach Space does not like tax increases, especially those that have had to be implemented at the local level in raising sales taxes, in raising real estate taxes to account for the loss of local government funds. This represents a massive shift from poor and middle class people to the wealthiest people of Ohio. This on Mr. Faber's watch.
We have just a couple more public questions. This one will start with Representative Faber, then go to Mr. Space. This one is from Brendan Inshow. He's an attorney and he's a former assistant legal counsel for the Auditor's Office. Brendan writes, the Auditor's Office recently released a report showing 100 Ohio cities have been spending more money than they're bringing in, and cities like Maple Heights have been in fiscal emergency status for years. What responsibility, if any, do you believe the Auditor's state has in trying to help these communities? Representative Faber.
Question. And that's the kind of thing that the Auditor's state's office should be doing. We should be using tools, training, and techniques to help local governments that are having fiscal crises find options to make sure they live within their means. Look, Bob and Betty Buckeye, they have to live within their budget. They can't just raise taxes or go in and say demand raises. In the end, what we need to do is make sure everybody can live within their means. And when we have a systemic, long-term failure to continue to meet your budget priorities, the Auditor's Office can come in with performance audits and use those other tools that we have to give them some suggestions of ways they can do things better, faster, and cheaper. That is a very strong tool for the Auditor's Office to use. And frankly, one of the things I'm going to do is partner with our local government partners to try and find ways to encourage them to seek the assistance of the office for performance audits. There is always this attitude sometimes when they think Columbus is going to come in and look at what they're doing and say, you should have been doing this better, you should have been doing that better. That leads to a reluctance to go in and take those services and that help from the state auditor's office. We're going to make it a partnership. We're going to let them get the credit for the recommendations and the improvements because, frankly, the auditor's office doesn't need credit. What we want is a better, more transparent, more efficient state government. We need that for local governments as well. We're going to utilize our tools to help them, and we're going to encourage them to seek us out to use those tools when appropriate.
So what can the Auditor's Office, if anything, do to help communities in fiscal emergency?
There is a role for performance audits, but you know what? Local governments want their money back. They want the money back that you've given to your richest donors. These communities continue to struggle. I've been ridiculed by Mr. Faber for suggesting that the legislature take into account things like the loss of revenues associated with these awful trade deals that I suspect he supports, on our communities. We're having a difficult time filling potholes. I've seen Jeff Tilton actually doing it physically himself. We've got problems manning our fire and police stations. funding our schools. The opioid epidemic, which has hit this region much harder than anywhere else in the state, we have virtually no guidance from state government. How do you expect these communities to deal with these challenges? By you coming in doing performance audits on them? That's not going to solve the problem. The problem will be solved when you restore justice and fairness when it comes to our tax dollars. These budgets have decimated these communities, and they have done so, keep in mind, to fund a tax reduction that benefits primarily wealthy people. You may be proud of that, but the people here in Zanesville aren't.
Yeah, Zach, you keep talking about a tax cut that benefited the wealthiest Ohioans. The tax cuts we did benefited all Ohioans. It has grown jobs and strengthened Ohio's economy. You know, the fact of the matter is almost every local government in Ohio has seen a revenue uptick because more Ohioans are working. When you were last in government, 400,000 fewer Ohioans were working. Talk about that economic impact on local governments. Do a study on that. Do a study on the fact that growing the economy helps all Ohioans. The fact of the matter is when we talk about what works,
Thank you.
we talk about things that grow jobs, and that's where we've been focused.
All right, our final public question comes from Amber Dunbar. She's a nurse managing the chronically sick at Mount Carmel Hospital in Columbus. Amber asks, we'll actually start with, I actually lost track. We'll just start with we'll start with Representative Faber. And the question to both of you, though, is she asks, now that Ohio has expanded Medicaid, what can you do in your role as auditor to ensure the program's integrity? Representative.
Thank you. Great question. That is going to be one of our strongest focuses, one of the first priorities that we're going to have in doing the performance audits of the state Medicaid system. I was one of the first persons to call out the problems with Ohio's pharmacy benefit managers, the fact that they were, in my opinion, putting small business pharmacies out of business and charging Ohioans a lot more. We flagged that. The Columbus Dispatch has now done a series of stories on it, basically confirming what we identified. A performance audit of the Medicaid system will identify ways for Medicaid to serve more people cheaper and faster. One of the things we're going to look at is the billing codes. The fact of the matter is for almost any Medicaid procedure, we're going to use data analytics to go in and find ways to identify billing codes that are being abused. For most procedures, there are multiple billing codes. We want to make sure they're using the one that's right for the acuity of the patient. Look, it may be that some institution that bills at the highest code repeatedly just has a sicker population, and that makes sense. But my guess is we're going to find abuse in that system. The other thing we're going to do as part of the Medicaid system is look at the way we're using Ohio's drug treatment dollars. We're going to look at programs to try and see what's working and what's not. We know in the drug court programs that I supported and that we expanded, there were ways, particularly with pharmaceutical intervention of drug treatment, that some things work better than others. When we look at those avenues, we're going to find ways to better utilize Ohio's Medicaid dollars. Now, let's put this in context. It's roughly 50% of all state spending is Ohio's Medicaid program. It is literally, if we don't keep the expansion and the rate of growth in check, going to consume all of the dollars that are going to be for local government. It is important we make that system work efficiently and effectively, and that's why the auditor's job is so important.
Mr. Space, you have 90 seconds on Medicaid expansion.
So it's important to remember, Keith Faber has been a staunch opponent of Medicaid expansion, and the failure to expand Medicaid would have decimated many of the healthcare providers throughout Ohio, in particular this part of the state, where in rural Ohio we suffer from a lot of challenges that apparently the folks that are making policy in Columbus have no clue about. The suggestion that he identified the PBM, the Pharmacy Benefit Manager scam, is interesting. The fact of the matter is, had the Dispatch not run its story, that'd probably still be happening, and there'd be no action from the legislature, which is consistent with everything else. Whether it's ECOT, payday lenders, pharmacy benefit managers, they act differently when someone's watching than when they think no one's watching. This is the bottom line. So in direct regard to your question, Jeremy, or Ms. Dunbar's question, I think Keith is right about one thing. It's a lot of money and the auditor has a lot of say. One of the things I hope to do as your next auditor is a performance audit on Medicaid with respect specifically to what works and what doesn't work in combating the opioid epidemic. Again, we have no statewide comprehensive plan to deal with this catastrophe. The auditor's office has a role in creating one.
Faber, 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that I was one of the first people flagging the PBM issue. The record's clear on that. But let's talk better about this whole concept of what the auditor's office is supposed to do. I agree. Zach, this is what we're supposed to do at the auditor's office. We're supposed to do performance audits. That's why I have put forth a policy and crafted legislation to require the auditor's office to audit every state agency every 4 to 6 years. That's the way you get efficiency in government. That's the way you can make bureaucrats be more accountable.
All right, thank you both. We're towards the end now, so we're going to move to closing statements. We'll start with Representative Faber.
Look, I am running for state auditor because I want to do the job. As the CPA said when they endorsed me, as the former last 4 auditors have said when they supported me, I have the skills, the ability, the background, the knowledge to hit the ground running on day one. The fact of the matter is that this office is about making sure Ohio works better. It is the place you go in government if you want to improve the way state government works. Look, the auditor's office doesn't audit individuals. It doesn't collect taxes. It doesn't audit businesses. What it does is audits the people who spend your money. My entire track record in government has been trying to get the people who spend your money to spend the money like it's their money. After all, frankly, we spend too much money in government. We use it too inefficiently, and we need to get to the position to where we can make government work better. I want to bring private sector skills and performance audits and data analytics to make the office work better. But I also want to make sure that our audit staff has the ability to keep their independence. You see, we're required as audit staff to go into an entity and audit them on how they're following the existing rules. Not say that we think you ought to be following some other set of rules. The fact of the matter is you need that independence. In fact, one auditor employee came up to me and said, Keith, the danger of some of the approaches that are being suggested by other people is that you're going to lose that independence of the audit staff to go in and actually have the ability to give them independent audits. That's why it's so important that the auditor's office not be politicized. That's why it's so important that the auditor's office follow generally accepted accounting principles and GASB rules and not go in and say, well, I know the law says this, but if I were in the legislature and I in Congress, I'd have done something different. You audit people under the existing set of rules, not what you want those rules to be. That's the biggest distinction between my opponent and me. I believe that the auditor's office is there to represent Bob and Betty Buckeye on how state government runs. They are the watchdog. Add that to our very definitive plans to create transparency in this office, and I ask for your vote to be state auditor because I know
Thank you.
Together we can make Ohio a better place for our kids and grandkids to meet their God-given potential.
Mr. Space, 2 minutes.
Jeremy, so I have my father with me today, Socrates Space. He travels with me regularly on this campaign. He's 88 years old, son of immigrants. My grandparents came to this country. They were drawn by the promise of a democracy. I feel obligated, and frankly, all of us should feel obligated, regardless of how far back we have to go in time, to find our immigrant family, to question this democracy when it goes astray. I'm questioning it now. Look, you referenced Bob and Betty Buckeye, who I assume you are referring to as the average person. The average person in this state has been left behind. You have normalized, Keith, the process of pay for play. You have demonstrated that you are the most transactional member of this General Assembly. You have a long record of it. Look, this government shouldn't be here for the donor class. It shouldn't be here for incumbent politicians. It should be here for all of us. I announced my campaign right here in this city, in Zanesville, over a year ago, because this represents a community that has been left behind. They have proven that nothing is beyond the reach of pay-for-play politics, not our public education, not the interests of the poor, not our local governments, not our prison system or our criminal justice system, not our healthcare delivery process. Nothing is beyond the reach of pay-for-play in Ohio, and it's time to change that. As your next auditor, again, I will approach this job with the viewpoint that if our General Assembly is using taxpayer dollars to pay off donors, the state auditor has a constitutional responsibility to do something about it. And as your next auditor, I'm going to help end gerrymandering and the divisiveness and the extremism that it has created and the dysfunctionality. We have a crisis of confidence in this state. People have lost faith in their democracy. We need to restore it. The auditor is uniquely positioned to do so. When I'm your next auditor, everybody's going to matter.
That'll do it for this debate. Thank you very much to the candidates and to Zane State College. And let's give a big round of applause to our two state auditor. Thank you very much.